My name's David. I'm not sure if that's my real name, but it's possible. I decided to use David a long time ago. I like it because it's forgettable. There are countless Davids in the world. I try my best to be invisible. Life's better that way. For as long as I can remember, I've always been plagued by horrible nightmares. I'll wake up in a state of panic, shouting and flailing around in the dark, but I can never remember why. As soon as I'm conscious, the dreams crumble and fall away. For many years, I could never recall what was happening in those dreams. Oh, why I would wake up screaming. And how about you? Do you remember your dreams? Do you recognize the faces in your nightmares? Speaking of life, it's probably safe to say mine's been a lot different from yours. I have no driver's license, no insurance payments, no credit score, none of that stuff. I live wherever I can for as long as I can. For the past 6 months, I was squatting in the offices of an abandoned warehouse. The office space was my domain, and the rest of the buildings belonged to the wildlife. It was much better than my last home. The place had running water, power, and heat, and the ceiling didn't leak. All in all, it was probably the best home I've ever had. I was hoping I could stay there for a long time, just me and the raccoons. I hoped I could stay there forever. I have no idea what'll happen next. All I know for sure is there'll be strange places, sinister faces. Beyond that, your guess is as good as mine. When I first moved into the warehouse, I found an unexpected windfall in the break room. They left a full-sized refrigerator behind, along with a hot plate, a microwave, and a coffee maker. In the cupboards, I found an assortment of dishes and cooking utensils. They even left several full tins of coffee, along with 5 containers of coffee whitener and a box full of sugar packets. It almost brought a tear to my eye. Small comforts of the bedrock of civilization. A toothbrush, a stick of deodorant, a hot cup of coffee. Those small comforts that would make us human. They also left behind a portable stereo. I don't really listen to music. I don't understand it, to be honest. But I always have talk radio playing in the background. Whenever I turn it off, all I can hear is the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights. I even have it playing softly when I sleep. I find it comforting to hear a voice that isn't mine. I don't really speak to anyone, and for the most part, no one tries to talk to me. AM radio is a safe and easy substitute for social interaction. It scratches a primal itch to be a part of a group without all the mess and danger that comes with the real deal. Having a stable housing situation allowed me to develop a morning routine: coffee, restroom, breakfast, then a workout. My workout takes roughly 2 hours, and I did it every morning without fail. It's the best part of my day. I used plastic jugs full of gravel for weights. I'd lift until my entire body was burning with exhaustion. I finished off the workout with jump rope and working the heavy bag. My jump rope was literally an 8-foot length of rope I found in the warehouse. The heavy bag was a patchwork creation of canvas and fishing line. I filled it with roughly 100 pounds of dirt from the empty lot behind the warehouse. Found the tarp flapping around in the wind in the shipping yard, and the fishing line was a score from a dumpster behind a strip mall. The gloves I used to protect my hands also come from the dumpster. A few stitches with the fishing line, and they were as good as new. We live in a throwaway society. We throw away food, material objects, and we even throw away other people. Into the trash they go. Wasted and then forgotten. I guess there's a metaphor in there somewhere, but I don't know what it is. I don't really understand metaphors either. Sometimes I don't get it and someone's joking with me, and even when I do get the joke, I don't know why I should laugh. My understanding of my environment is purely practical in nature. I understand warmth, comfort. I understand cold and pain. My hobbies are working out, scavenging from dumpsters, and avoiding contact with other people. Everything else in this world is alien to me. Falls outside the realm of my experience. I would punch and kick the bag until I was gasping for breath. Then I'd do it some more. After my workout, I'd head to the restroom to take a bath in the sink. This is the worst part of my day because I'd have to look at myself in the mirror. The man who stared back at me was a ghost. He was nothing. He drifted around on the fringes of reality, unseen and unheard. His existence was meaningless. I've never been sure what it means to be a good person. I think most of us fall somewhere between half-decent and horrible. Sometimes we choose to do good. Sometimes we choose to do evil. I can go either way. And sometimes an action that would ordinarily be considered evil is actually a net positive for good. Personally, I have no problem with telling a lie for my own benefit. I'd admit that I'm also something of a thief. On occasion, I've taken things that weren't mine to take, and just recently, I started murdering people. It all started with the dead body. The first time I saw him, I was rooting around into a dumpster behind a 7-Eleven variety store. I turned around with a stale loaf of Wonder Bread in each hand, and I found myself looking at a very young boy, dressed in only a grimy pair of denim overalls and a t-shirt on a cold winter night. He was barefoot on the frozen concrete. He was painfully thin. His skin was pale, ashy blue in the glow of my flashlight. He looked like a ghost. The boy pressed a skinny finger against his lips to silence me, and he beckoned me to follow him. I watched in disbelief as he drifted around the corner of the building and disappeared. I hesitated, and then I dropped my scavenged loaves of bread and chased after him. I was convinced the boy was some kind of hallucination. But no. There he was, trudging around with the soles of his feet slapping against the concrete. I shuffled after him on stiff legs despite the bitter cold. I started sweating under my jacket. I felt an uncomfortable pressure in my chest, suffocating mixture of fear and dread. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop following him. I felt like I was no longer in control. It soon became apparent no one else could see the dead boy. People would shuffle aside to avoid crossing his path, but they wouldn't look at him. A lot of them had vaguely uneasy expressions on their faces as he passed by, but no one looked at him. Eventually, the boy stopped in front of a pizza parlor. He beckoned me with his finger again, his expression blank and empty. Reluctantly, I shuffled closer. My heart was hammering in my chest. He pointed to a customer through the grimy window. I didn't recognize him. It was just some older guy eating his pizza, a random stranger minding his own business. The boy pushed something into my hand. It was my own knife. A folding blade I found in the dumpster behind a sporting goods store. I had to replace the rivet, and then it was good as new. The business end was almost 5 inches long, and I kept it very sharp. The dead boy stared at me, his skinny arms dangling at his sides. I looked around to make sure no one was watching. There was no one else around, just me and my unsettling new companion. I quietly asked, "Who are you? Are you real?" "I don't think you're real." The boy silently pointed at the customer through the glass again, and then he was gone. I was standing by myself with my pocket knife in hand, watching a stranger through a window. I spun around and hurried away into the night. I went straight home to the warehouse and I hid under the blankets for a while. I didn't know what was going on, and I didn't want to know. I just wanted to be left alone. It took a long time to fall asleep. As usual, I jolted awake in a state of raw panic. However, something was different this time. I could remember the final moments of my nightmare. I clicked on the lamp beside my mattress, and I scampered down the hall to grab some office stationery. I jotted down everything I could remember in point form. I wrote, "I'm outside. It's sometime during the summer months, June through September. I'm running away from something. The grass is long and full of weeds. It's a meadow or a barnyard. There's a building to my right, big and red. It might be a barn. There's crop growing in a field to my left, tall, green, probably corn." And that was all I could remember, just a brief sliver. Hardly more than 2 blinks and a heartbeat, but it was something. I laid back down on my mattress, cradling my precious new memory close to my heart. I didn't sleep another wink that night. I just stared up into the darkness, my heart thumping too fast in my chest, and I waited for sunrise. I met Christy a few nights later. Interacting with other people really isn't my thing, but I felt like I needed to stop her before it was too late. She was trying to kill someone in broad daylight. I heard a disturbance of screeching and cursing on my way home from my dumpster rounds. I could hear it from 3 blocks away. As I drew closer to the source of the ruckus, I got ready to cross the street. I already mind my own business, and I hope others would do the same. It's better that way. I rounded the corner and saw 2 young women pounding on each other in the middle of the street. Both of them were punching with one hand and trying their damnedest to rip out a chunk of hair with the other. A couple of old drunks were standing nearby, wheezing with laughter and egging them on. It was a chaotic scene, and I wanted no part of it. One of the women managed to drag the other to the ground. She hit her head against the curb on the way down, and she instantly went limp. The victor cried out in triumph, and she scrambled on top of her fallen opponent. She landed a few sloppy punches. She grabbed a chunk of pavement off the road. She screamed, "That's what you get!" and she hammered the unconscious girl square in the face. I muttered, "Oh shit," and I pulled the victor off of her soon-to-be murder victim. She wriggled in my grasp like an alley cat, bellowing at me to fuck off and let her go. I dragged her a short distance away and tried to reason with her. I said, "If you stop now, no one will care. If you don't stop, you'll go to prison." The girl roared, "I don't give a fuck about jail." She tried to bite my arm. I shoved her away and prepared myself for a scuffle. As I expected, she immediately charged at me, so I planted my boot in the narrow midsection. She flew back and went down in a tangle of limbs on the street. The drunks howled with demented laughter. It was the greatest thing they'd ever seen. One of them stumbled over, burbling a stream of boozy nonsense as he reached for my shoulder. I slapped his hand out of the air and grunted, "Fuck off!" Even though he was pretty much obliterated, the drunk was still wise enough to do as he was told. I turned back to the girl and said, "You won, so leave it alone. Don't lose your freedom." The girl shot me a smoldering look through her tangled, greasy hair, and she gasped, "That bitch stole from me!" I gave her a tired nod and sighed. "Go ahead then, do what you gotta do. I'm leaving." I heard a patter of scurrying footsteps as she came running up behind me. I turned and got ready for another attack, but the girl held up her hands and gasped, "No, I'm not gonna... I just, like... Yeah, you're right, she's not worth it." I gave her a slight nod and muttered, "Okay, that's good. Take care." I started walking away. She scrambled to catch up, her overstuffed knapsack bouncing against her back with every step. She panted, "Hey, wait a sec! Where are you going right now?" I snapped, "I'm going home," and kept walking. I was sincerely regretting my decision getting involved. I didn't want this interaction, or any interaction for that matter. I wanted to be left alone. The girl started jogging to keep up to me, her face pale and strained. She said, "You're lucky, I could have pulled a gun on you or something, right? And then what?" I curtly answered, but she didn't. And I stepped up the pace. The girl wheezed. "Holy shit! How do you walk so fast? Slow down, man. Listen, I'm sorry I came at you like that. I was just mad, You're right. You did the right thing. Like a good Samaritan, being a good citizen and all that shit. Hey, come on. I want to talk for a second." I tersely replied, "No thanks," and kept plowing onward. The girl cursed under her breath and grabbed my arm, digging the heels of her sneakers into the sidewalk as an anchor. Her face was a mask of desperation. I disengaged myself from her clutching hand, and I firmly shook my head no. I don't have any money. I don't have any drugs. No meth, no crack, no fentanyl, no drugs at all. I don't have what you need. She waved her hands in the air and stammered, No. It's nothing like that. I really need a place to crash tonight. I got kicked out of the motel because I couldn't pay, and I don't have anywhere to go. I've been on the street for 3 days, and I'm cold, I'm tired, and I'm broke." She hesitated and then added, "We can talk about it, if you maybe you want something, I could do something for you." I shook my head again and told her, "No, I don't want that. Look, you don't know me. I don't know you. Let's keep it that way." She clutched for my arm again and chirped, "My name's Christy. How about you? What's your name?" Against my better judgment, I answered, "It's David." She croaked, "There, see, now we know each other. Man, I'm in a bad spot right now. I promise I won't mess with you. I won't do anything shady. I'm not like that. I just need to be inside somewhere. I need to get warm." I grimaced and rubbed my temples. What a nightmare. I asked, "What about the shelter?" She looked down at her feet, and in a listless tone, she replied, "The shelter kicked me out. I really have nowhere to go." I opened my mouth to say no again, but instead, I heard myself ask, "Are you hungry?" Christy's face flushed red with a bleak mixture of gratitude and shame. She whispered, "Yeah, I am. I'm really hungry. Thank you." My heart was pounding. I felt nauseous. This was all wrong. I couldn't have a stranger in my living space, especially not some wildcat lady off the street, but I knew what it was like to be cold and hungry. I knew the dread of not having a place to go, and I honestly didn't blame her for trying to kill the thief. It's hard out here. You have to enforce your intention to stay alive by any means necessary. That's just how it is. She was holding my sleeve. I shook her hand off and muttered, "Come on then, let's get you something to eat." Christy claimed she was 20 years old. She looked like she'd been anywhere from 15 to 40. It's hard to tell. Her eyes were sunken and hollow, and her teeth were starting to turn brown. She was definitely an addict of some kind. This part of town is littered with them. They steal, rob, and sell themselves until they're all used up, and then they die. Happens every day. Her name and age may have been false, but Christy wasn't lying when she said she was hungry. She devoured a large can of tomato soup, 2 peanut butter sandwiches, and an entire sleeve of stale crackers. She washed it all down with several glasses of powdered milk. When she was done, she gave me a faint smile and said, "That was good. I needed that. Man, this place is fucking awesome. I gotta find a place like this. Hell yeah, squatting's the best way to go. This is a sweet deal." Darkly, I mentioned, it won't last forever, but yeah, I like it. No one knows I'm here. Christy drew her knees up to her chest and wrapped her arms around them. It made her look like a child. I pitied her. found myself wishing I could help her, but this would never happen in the real world. I knew she'd probably be dead within a year or two. It was inevitable. Christy saw me studying her, and she gave me a shy little smile. She said, "No one knows except me. I'm special. Don't worry, I won't tell anyone." Her expression turned somber. She sat straight up in her chair and asked, "Okay, so we're good here, right? You said you don't want anything, like, you know." A shiver raced down my spine, and I felt a gurgle of nausea in my stomach. I fear close contact of any kind. If someone's close enough to touch me, I start to panic. I grunted, "No, none of that. I don't like that." A look of relief spread across her narrow features. She said, "Good. I don't like it much either. Cool." I got up to wash the dishes, and Christy lapsed into a brooding silence. I could hear the feet of her chair sliding around on the floor as she shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Finally, she blurted out, Hey, where's the bathroom in this place? Is it somewhere down the hall out there?" I nodded, and she said, "Awesome, I'll be right back." A few minutes passed, then a few more. I knew what she was doing. When she came back, she had a glassy sheen in her eyes. She made it halfway across the break room, and then she gave me a cross-eyed look and mumbled, I gotta..." Her eyes fluttered, and her dopey smile melted away. She started to lean forward at the waist, her scrawny arms dangling like wind chimes. I left her standing there and went out to the warehouse to round up some packing materials for a makeshift bed. She was still teetering around in the same spot when I came back. I set up a nest of cardboard inserts and bubble wrap in the corner of the break room. Then I went to bed. I hoped she'd be gone in the morning, just a mild bump in my road of solitude. I didn't want to know her. People are poisonous. If you ingest limited amounts over a period of time, you might be okay. Overexposure, however, can prove to be fatal. That night I suffered through another intense nightmare, as per usual. When I woke up, I realized it was the same dream as the night before, and this time I could remember even more details. I grabbed my stationery pad and added these points to the list. I'm sitting at a large table with a bunch of kids. There's 2 adults, a man and a woman. Everyone has a plate, but the man and the woman are the only ones eating. The rest of us are starving. Now I'm running outside just like the last time. The building is definitely a barn. It's very early in the morning, or maybe just after sunset. I'm running away from a fire. There's smoke in the air. I can hear the fire blazing behind me. I can feel the heat on my back. I didn't understand what any of that meant, but I knew how it made me feel. It made me feel very, very bad. It was the same feeling I had while following the dead boy down the street, a sense of impending doom. Something was going to happen. An epiphany was looming on the horizon, and I knew it would be explosive and horrendous in every possible way. I padded down to the restroom, and I used the urinal in the dark. When I was done, I poked my head into the break room to check on Christy. She was snoring away in her bed of packing materials. Even though she was dead asleep, her brow was still creased with a slight frown. I wonder if she knew the demons that haunted her sleep. In the end, it wouldn't matter. Either way, they would soon drag her to the underworld. I thought to myself, and then I'm next. I felt sick to my stomach. I didn't want this girl in my life. She made me remember that I'm human, and I resented that deeply. I didn't want to be human. I just wanted to exist. I murmured, "Go the fuck away." and I tiptoed back to my bedroom. I didn't think I'd fall asleep again, but I was out like a light in no time, and this time, I didn't dream at all. I slept like the dead. In the morning, I found Christy nursing a mug of coffee in the break room, patiently waiting for me to get up. I cooked us both breakfast on the hot plate, but she barely ate anything. She was already high. She nodded off for a while as she watched me do my workout from a corner of the room, sitting on the floor with her legs crossed beneath her. When her eyes could focus again, she mumbled, "You're like, like friggin' Batman over there. Were you one of those MMA fighters or something?" I put my hands on my knees and gasped. "Something like that. It was a long time ago." Truth is, I honestly didn't know where I learned to fight, or when, or how. Just like my real name, that information was lost in the fog of the past. When I caught my breath, I told her, "It's time for you to go. You can wash up in the restroom before you leave if you feel like it. Honestly, you don't smell very good. Here, I'll give you a towel. You can keep it when you're done." Her cheeks flushed pink with embarrassment. She looked away and muttered, "I've been on the street for a while. What do you expect? Yeah. Okay, thank you." When she was done, I herded my unwanted guest to the back exit. She gave me an unhappy look and grumbled, "This is it, huh?" I clapped my hands together and briskly replied, "Glad I could help. Now it's time to go." I pushed the door open and froze like a statue. The dead boy was standing on the crumbling sidewalk. He was still wearing the same t-shirt and filthy overalls. The boy's ghostly feet were shockingly pale against the oil-stained concrete. His gaunt, shriveled features were mottled with splotches of purple and blue. It looked like he had suffered a terrible beating before he died. The dead boy drifted closer. He held up his hand, his palm facing me. Then he gravely shook his head. The message was clear. He wanted to let her stay. Christy lightly touched my arm and asked, "Hey, you okay, man? What is it? You look kind of freaked out." I jerked away from her touch and I slammed the door shut. I let out a shuddering breath and croaked, Yeah, I'm okay. "Look, I just changed my mind. You can stay for a while if that's what you want. It's fine." Christy was clearly bewildered by this turn of events, but she was also very relieved that she wasn't going to be tossed onto the street. She clapped her hands together and chirped, "That's awesome, man. You're a lifesaver, for real. That's why I followed you yesterday. I could tell you were that you were okay." I gave her a distant look and grunted. "I'm not sure about that. But yeah, you can stay. Just don't rob me, okay? Almost everything I have came from a dumpster, but I still hate to lose it." She scoffed and said, "I fucking hate thieves. That's why I got booted from the motel, because that bitch stole my money. I'd never steal from you. I swear to God." I gave her a stiff nod and said, "We'll see." I led her back to the office, and she immediately disappeared into the restroom again. That was fine. Her addiction was none of my business. Frankly, I had bigger things to worry about. My heart was still slamming in my chest. I was hoping the first incident was just a brief, unexplained break with reality, but I was wrong. The dead boy's presence felt like the weight of 10,000 sins, a mountain of evil that would crush me into the ground. My haze of blissful ignorance was in peril. I was afraid of what would happen when that fog lifted. I was very afraid. "5 days later, I committed my first murder. I had just said goodbye to Christy, who was on her way to work her usual corner. She woke up sick that morning, and there was only one thing that could make the sickness go away. It stirred something in my heart, but reality isn't pleasant on this side of the city. There was nothing I can do for her. I told her to be safe, and then I headed off to check out the dumpster behind the dollar store. After we parted ways, the dead boy stepped out from behind the streetlight, thin as a rail and gray as ashes. He motioned for me to follow him. Once again, I was compelled to obey his silent command. He led me down the street for a few blocks, a walking corpse who was invisible to everyone but me. He stopped in front of a liquor store with bars on the windows, and he waited for me to catch up. I already knew who was inside. My stomach did a slow, sickly roll in my gut. I wasn't prepared. I wasn't prepared for this at all. I stood there for a minute or two, shivering in the cold as the dead boy stared up at me, his face slack and expressionless. I knew I should just turn around and run away, but I couldn't force myself to move. And then my target came bustling through the door, clutching a bottle in a paper bag as he headed down the street. I pulled up my hood and leaned against the wall as he passed by. I was just another bit of flotsam in the vast ocean of the less fortunate, unknown and unseen. He didn't even look at me. I turned to speak to my troublesome spirit, but he was gone. I whispered, "Oh, fuck." And I started following the guy at a distance. It had to happen. I didn't have a choice. I got my opportunity when the guy ducked into an alley to relieve himself against a garbage can. I crept up behind him, my knife already in hand, and I pressed the tip to the side of his neck. He let out a startled squawk and twisted away by reflex, squirting piss in an arcing slash across the decaying brick wall. I shoved him face first into the wall, knocking over the garbage can with a loud bang and a clatter of empty cans. I snarled, "Don't turn around, be quiet, and do as you're told." He quavered, "Don't do anything crazy, okay? Take it easy." I took a breath to steady myself. I felt like I was about to faint. I leaned in close behind him and breathed. "Who are you? What's your name?" My hostage stammered. What are you? Look, just take my wallet and go, man. It's in my back pocket. Whatever I got in there, it's yours. I fished it out of his pocket with one hand, still holding the knife against his neck with the other one. I flipped it open and squinted at his driver's license through the grimy plastic window. He wheezed, I got like $80 in there. Take it. I won't tell nobody. I said, "Stanley Mortimer Garland. That's your name? Yeah? Let me look at you." I spun him around and pressed the knife under his eye. I studied his face carefully, but I still didn't recognize him. I growled, "Do you know me, Stanley? Do you know who I am?" His eyes began to water, and he blinked the tears away. He gasped, "No, I don't know you. Look, man, I don't even..." He trailed off, and a flush of red spread across his broad, acne-scarred face. He choked. "Holy shit. How the hell are you still alive?" I felt a spike of adrenaline slam into my heart. I demanded, "Do you know who I am? I was a kid at the time, right? It was on a farm. There was a cornfield and a barn." I poked the knife into his skin for emphasis, and a fat drop of blood oozed a trail down his stubby cheek. He croaked, "You don't remember? Look, that's probably for the best, okay? You get me? You don't want to know. Just let it die." I felt a flare of rage, and I seized it with desperate hands. I needed that anchor, or my nerve would break and I would simply flee into the night. I hissed, "I'll let you die, motherfucker, right here in this alley, right now, frozen in a puddle of piss with your dick hanging out. Tell me what happened on that farm, Stanley. Tell me everything you know." His eyes were wide and wet and terrified. He murmured, I didn't agree with what was going on in there. It was just a job. I mean, that don't make it right, but I never agreed with it. After the fire, I stopped associating with those people. I swear to God." My face was burning hot in the bitter cold. I gasped. Yeah, a fire. I remember that. I remember running away from a fire. What was going on in there, Stanley? I can remember sitting at a table with a bunch of other kids, and we didn't have anything to eat. There were 2 adults, a man and a woman, and they were eating, but the rest of us had nothing to eat. An empty plate. Was that you? My hostage blinked away more tears. He begged, just forget about it, man, please. It's over, you're alive. Let it go. I suddenly became aware he was slowly easing something out of his coat pocket. It was almost too late. I grabbed his arm and the bullet pinged off the wall behind me. I shoved his gun hand into the air and drove my knife into his fat, sagging stomach. He screamed, "Ah, you crazy bastard!" And the gun went off a second time. I dragged the blade upward, opening his guts, and I rammed my head into his nose. He went down hard, the pistol tumbling from his nerveless fingers. I kicked him in the face. His skull made a dreadful crunching sound as it bounced off the wall, and then he was still. His intestines were oozing onto the filthy concrete, riding on a slop of yellowish fat curds and dark, steaming blood. My mind was a roaring tornado of panic. I was shaking all over. I groaned, "Oh, fuck me." I grabbed his wallet out of the puddle of piss and blood at my feet. I wiped it off on his coat, followed by the blade of my knife. Then I ran away as far as I could. I ran until I couldn't run anymore. My sides and my lungs were on fire. My mind was on fire. I killed him. This man who I couldn't remember to save my life, and I was glad. It felt good to kill him. It felt like coming home. The jittery high I got from murdering Mr. Stanley Garland was extremely intense. By the time I got back to the warehouse, I was almost hyperventilating from a rush of paranoia. Was I losing my mind? He admitted that he knew me, and he admitted he was involved in my past somehow, but what if none of that actually happened? The dead boy, the memories disguised as nightmares, Stanley's veiled confession. What if it was all in my head? What if I just killed an innocent stranger and took his wallet? It briefly crossed my mind that even the murder itself could have been delusion, but the blood on my pants and my jacket said otherwise. The second I stepped through the door, I stripped naked and shoved everything into a garbage bag. I felt a stab of regret at losing the coat and the boots. It was hard to find stuff like that in good condition. I scrubbed myself at the sink of the restroom head to toe. After I got dressed, I thoroughly mopped all the floors. When it was all done, I forced myself to stop panicking. For better or for worse, it happened. There was no going back. Now it was time to figure out who that guy was and what role he played in my forgotten past. I sat down in the break room and went through the contents of his wallet. Stanley had both a regular driver's license and also a commercial driver's license. His full name on both licenses was Stanley Mortimer Garland. There were also a jumble of cards in there, along with some old receipts, a neatly folded check stub, and $80 in cash. Among the pile of cards in his wallet, I found a business card for a local contractor. His business was called Paul Stevens Contracting. A line of text beneath the company name read fences, decks, landscaping, and a whole lot more. The check stub was from the same company. After deductions, Stanley had netted $10,000 in a 2-week period. I scribbled down some notes on one of my trusty stationery pads, then I tossed the wallet into the garbage bag. I intended to burn it to ashes in the shipping yard sometime after midnight. In a better area of town, this kind of activity might draw a lot of attention. I didn't have to worry about that in my neighborhood. In my neighborhood, the police only came to track a chalk outline around another dead body. It was a dystopian hellscape. But it was home. I didn't know anything else. Christy came back a while later with a half a pizza and a few cans of beer. I declined the beer, but I devoured the pizza. I didn't have it very often, so it was a rare treat. She sipped a beer and complained for a while about her clients. I absently nodded along, letting her voice wash into the background as I listened to the local AM radio station. During the 11 p.m. news bulletin, they briefly mentioned a dead body that had been found in an alleyway. I felt my stomach tighten, but I remained calm. There was a decent chance they were talking about a different body. Murder is almost a daily occurrence in this side of town. Christy came back from the restroom and she nodded out at the table. Eventually, she mumbled something and lurched away down the hall. When she was gone, I took the trash bag outside and I burned it in a bonfire of broken pallets. I stared into the flames and considered my next move. The contents of his wallet had produced a few leads, and I tended to follow up on them. I watched as the fire wound down to a pile of embers, and then I turned in for the night. I woke up just before dawn with a scream lodged in my throat. I grabbed my notepad and I wrote. Stanley was driving us somewhere on a school bus. He looked a lot younger, maybe 20 or 30 years. There was another man standing at the front of the bus. He was holding a gun. I was taken to a large room. There was a bunch of chairs set up in rows, and there was a big cage in the middle of the room. I tried to run, but the man with a gun caught me and dragged me back. I put the notepad down, I turned off the lamp, and after a half an hour of staring into the darkness, I murmured to myself, "Get ready, Mr. Stevens. I'll be seeing you real soon." Before I did anything else, I wanted to have a look around Stanley Garland's place of residence. Unfortunately, I didn't have the presence of mind to search his pockets for a set of keys. I had no choice except for to do it the old-fashioned way and break in. I would have to whip up something of a disguise. Stanley lived in a much better neighborhood, and I was going to stand out like a sore thumb. I looked like a vagrant, and that would not do at all. I carefully trimmed a good 6 inches off my beard, and I took the clippers to my hair. A few swipes of the razors had eaten things up, and now I almost looked like a normal citizen. I zipped up a pair of blue coveralls over my clothes, and I put on a greasy baseball cap I found in the boiler room. The final touches to my disguise were an old clipboard with a stack of shipping documents and my tool bag. I was no longer a homeless dumpster pirate. I was a maintenance man, and I had a job to do. I used the money from Stanley's wallet to pay for bus fare. 20 minutes later, I was casually strolling up to the front entrance of the building. I could see an elderly woman perched on a chair in the lobby. She was staring at me, her phone in one hand and an unlit cigarette in the other. She made eye contact and her face wrinkled with a distrustful scowl. I gave her an absent-minded wave as I frowned at my clipboard. I pretended to check the address again, then plopped the bag down so I could flip through my imaginary paperwork. The old woman tottered over to the door. She pushed it open a few inches, and then stuck her face in the narrow gap. She squawked, "Are you here to fix the light in the hallway?" I frowned some more at my clipboard and muttered, "Yeah, I think that was on the list. Yeah, where was that again? Let me see." The old woman's eyes lit up with excitement. She pointed up above her head and exclaimed, "Second floor! The damn light's been buzzing and flickering for almost a week. It's driving me crazy." She held the door open for me, babbling a stream of complaints as I stepped inside. My heart was slamming around beneath my oil-stained overalls. I honestly didn't think it was going to work. But it did. I was in. I gave the old gal a friendly smile and said, "Oh, I'm sure it's been a huge pain. I'll take care of it." I turned my attention back to the clipboard and hurried away. I was just a maintenance guy. I was here to do my maintenance guy things. Stan lived up on the 3rd floor. It was 11 in the morning and the hallway was silent. Most of the residents were probably at work. This was helpful because I was about to make some noise. I didn't know the first thing about lockpicking, but if you don't care about making some racket, there are many ways to get through a locked door. I used a 1/2-inch drill bit to make a hole between the deadbolt and the knob. The hole was a starting point for a rough circle, which I cut with a stolen, reciprocating saw. A few seconds later, I was reaching through the hole to unlock the deadbolt. The entire process took less than a minute. It quickly became obvious that Stanley Garland was an alcoholic. Judging by the used needles that were scattered throughout the apartment, Stan was also an addict. This would explain why he'd been regularly visiting my sketchy little corner of the city. You won't find any banks or strip malls there, but drugs and prostitution were literally everywhere. Like most people who struggle with substance abuse, Stan wasn't much of a housekeeper. His floors were mostly buried in piles of dirty clothes, fast food containers, and random items of every description. There were stacks of dishes on the corner, and an army of broken bottles littered every surface. Overall, it painted a picture of a man who was deeply mired in both addiction and depression. Stanley had no drive or energy to keep his life in order. It was probably a struggle just to get from one day to the next. I started methodically searching through all the chaos and clutter. I soon discovered an old pile of check stubs amongst the jungle of crap on his desk. They were from a bus company that supplied transportation for school kids. It appeared that Stanley used to work for this company 5 days a week. But judging from the dates on the stubs, he hadn't been employed by them for quite some time. I could see that his employment with the mysterious Paul Stevens was far more lucrative. Did he simply quit the bus company and jump ship for a better paying job? It was another question that needed to be answered. I found a gun in his nightstand, along with a few boxes of ammunition. I put them in my tool bag and I kept searching. In the back of his bedroom closet, I unearthed a shoebox of Polaroid photographs. They were all pictures of boys, all of them taken in front of a white background. Most of the boys were smiling, but some of them had a watchful expression, as if they knew something was wrong. There were dozens of these pictures in the shoebox. On the back of each picture, someone had written a name and a date. Jeffrey, October 17th. Doug, June 3rd. Ricardo, March 28th. As I flipped through the photographs, it occurred to me that one of them might be me. A film of sweat suddenly popped up on my forehead, and I was racked by a violent shudder. My heart was pounding wildly, and I felt like I was going to pass out. I sat down on Stan's rumpled, smelly bed, and I focused on controlling my breathing. Something awful was swimming up from the murky depths of my subconscious. Dark leviathan rising to the surface after a long and restless slumber. There was nothing I could do to stop it. The memory exploded into my mind with a flash from a camera. Stanley Garland was smiling at me from behind the tripod. He said, "All done. Now follow the nice man over there. Yeah, go on. Next." The nice man led me down a hallway with fading wallpaper. He ushered me into a large room that was full of bunk beds, row upon row of them. There were a bunch of other kids in the room. They were all appeared to be between 9 and 11 years old. As we came walking in, they stopped what they were doing and stared at me. I was suddenly afraid. I asked Mr. Nice Man if I could go home, and he answered with a ferocious slap across my face. It knocked me to the floor. I was shocked into silence. I blinked at him through a film of tears, and he smiled at me. He said, "This is your home now. You aren't going back." The door slammed shut behind him, and I heard a deadbolt slide into place. I immediately started bawling my eyes out. All of the other kids gave me a look of disgust, and they turned away from me. The kid with a crew cut came strolling over. He dragged me by the arm to an empty bunk. He pointed at it and said, "This one's yours." I collapsed onto the hard mattress, and I continued to cry my heart out. After a while, the kid on the top bunk leaned down to have a look at me. One of his eyes was cold and indifferent. The other was bloodshot and puffy from a fading shiner. A deep split in his upper lip had been stitched closed. In a matter-of-fact tone, my new bunkmate told me, "You're not going to make it. You're going to die in there." I felt a tap on my shoulder, and I jumped to my feet with a strangled yelp of terror. It was the dead boy. I was back in the present, dripping with sweat and shaking all over. My ghostly companion drifted over to the window and pointed down at the street. 2 burly cops were climbing out of a police cruiser. He started heading up the walkway to the front entrance. It's time to go. I shoved the hat and the coveralls into my tool bag, and I scrambled down the fire escape. By the time the cops were approaching the door to Stanley's apartment, I was already hailing a cab down the street. Cabbie dropped me off 5 blocks from the boundaries to my squalid neighborhood. He refused to drive any closer. I paid the fare, and I melted away amongst my people. A parade of broken souls with no clear motive or direction. My field trip to Stanley's residence had unveiled more questions than answers. It appeared Stanley was involved in a human trafficking operation. Was the mysterious Paul Stevens also involved? And what was the significance of that giant cage? More and more questions kept popping up, and I was determined to find the answer. When I got back to the warehouse, I found Christy sitting in the break room. She looked like she'd been crying. There was a newspaper spread out on the table in front of her. I asked, "What's wrong?" And she stabbed the page with a trembling finger. She croaked, "This guy. I knew this guy." I leaned over her shoulder and saw a grainy picture of Stanley Garland's smiling face. The headline blared, "Police ask for public's assistance in murder investigation." My heart lurched in my chest, but I kept my expression neutral. I said, "I'm sorry for your loss." Kirsty snorted. "No, not loss. He was a piece of shit. I didn't know his real name was Stanley. Everyone called him Morty." Kirsty wrapped her skinny arms around herself as she stared down at his face. She quietly breathed. "My dad wasn't a bad guy, but he was like, a wannabe biker. Just hang around. Sometimes they'd pay him to do stuff they didn't feel like doing themselves. I guess it wasn't much money, because we were always broke. Anyway, so this Morty guy, he moves in down the hall from us, and they start hanging out. He was a bus driver, but he was into a bunch of other stuff too, like organized crime, I guess." She paused to order her thoughts and then continued. "Anyway, so Morty got my dad involved in something, and things started to get better for us. Suddenly we got new furniture, new clothes, and there's always food in the fridge." She gave me a crooked, miserable smile. "So we have all this cool stuff now, but Dad was always in a bad mood. He was always angry all the time, moody, intense, and I'd catch him staring at me sometimes, and he'd have this really, sad look on his face. And then he went on for a year or so, and then one day he just disappeared, left the apartment for work, and he just never came back. Me and Mom were pretty fucked after that, because Mom didn't have access to his money, and he had a few $100 stashed around the apartment, and that's all we had. Anyway, Morty came knocking on the door maybe 3 weeks after Dad disappeared, and Mom talked to him for a while, and she didn't seem very happy with what he was saying. He saw me peeking at them from around the corner, and he whispered something into her ear. I don't know what he said, but Mom, she lost her shit on the guy, and she started screaming at him like a freaking banshee, right? And she pushed him into the hallway, and she was really upset, She kept me home from school the next day, and every other day for the rest of the week. I wasn't allowed to go anywhere. I just watched TV while Mom was chain smoking and watching the door." Christy tapped the picture on Morty's smiling face with a ragged fingernail. She said, "Whatever he said to her, it freaked her out. She ended up selling all of our stuff to other people in our building, and the new couch, the big TV, our dressers, our beds, everything, gone in 2 days. And then we're riding a Greyhound bus across the country to live with my grandma. Just like that." I stayed quiet as I absorbed this new information. I let it swirl around with the other fragments of the big picture, and I waited for her to continue. Christy folded the newspaper to hide his face, and she pushed it away with a trembling hand. She muttered, "He got my dad into something heavy, something really bad, and I think he was gonna snitch on them or something, so they killed him." I asked if she had any pictures of her dad. Christy dug around in her backpack and she pulled out a crumpled photograph. She smoothed it out on the table and said, "It's the only one I have. Mom threw his pictures away when she got serious with her new boyfriend. Took it out of the trash and I hid it in my room." I examined the picture, and another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Christy's dad was the guy who was standing at the front of the bus in my dream. He was the one who dragged me back when I tried to run away. I realized I was gritting my teeth, and I forced myself to relax my jaw. Let me guess. Your mom decided to shack up with the new guy, and it turned out to be a bad move. Christy plucked the photograph out of my hand. She tucked it into the breast pocket of her jacket, close to her heart, and she croaked, "Yeah, she did. He's the reason I ran away. He was a creep." We both lapsed into a brooding silence. As we sat there, thinking our dark and troubling thoughts, the dead boy suddenly stepped out from behind Christy's chair. He stood beside her and stared at me. Christy frowned and leaned away from him. Even though she couldn't see him, she could sense his presence on a primal level. She rubbed her temples and sighed. "Oh, fuck it. It's whatever at this point, right? Just whatever." She pushed her chair back and stiffly announced, "I'm gonna head back out for a while. I'll see you later." I looked up at her shriveling, miserable face, and I knew she wasn't long for this awful world. Christy was trapped in a nightmarish waltz that would never end. She worked the corner to score the drugs, which dulled her senses enough to work the corner again. Her entire existence was a grim two-step dance of corner to dope man to corner, over and over again. There wasn't any light behind those sunken, bloodshot eyes. She was running on autopilot. There was nothing but fumes in the tank. I quietly asked, "What's his name?" Christy wrapped her arms around herself in a protective circle and quivered. "His name's Greg Thomas. I fucking hate his guts." "Well, maybe something will happen to him someday. Maybe he'll end up like Morty. Would you like that?" Christy went silent for a while, her eyes glittering with a film of tears beneath the harsh fluorescent light. The ghost of a smile touched her lips, there and gone in the blink of an eye. She gave me a slight nod and whispered, "Yeah, I'd like that a lot." And then she was rushing down the hall, and the exit door swung shut behind her with a metallic clunk. I was left by myself with the radio blurbling away in the background as usual. It was another news report. The news was mostly bad. Someone had once told me nothing is fair, and even though I couldn't remember who said that to me, I knew they were right. Safety is an illusion, and justice is a lie. The dead boy was still lingering at the table. He was looking at me with an air of impatience. I pointed at him and snapped. I used to be invisible. I was happy that way. I didn't have to think about anything. I didn't have to know anything. I didn't have to commit felonies and put myself in danger. I just had to stay alive. One day at a time. You took that from me. Do you understand? Leave me alone for a while." The dead boy drifted out into the hallway and turned to look at me. I groaned. "Go fuck yourself." but I couldn't disobey his wordless commands. My own body wouldn't allow it. I got up from my chair and followed. He led me to the large mirror in the restroom. He pointed at my reflection, and I was forced to confront my image. My fresh haircut had revealed the ragged stumps of my left ear. I stared at the network of scars on my face, the leaning slant of my nose, and another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. For many years, I had been unable to grasp the concept of myself as an actual human being. I had never asked myself, who am I? Why is my face all messed up? Why am I so afraid all the time? Why does my entire body clench like a fist if someone is standing too close to me? My days were a dream, and my reality was trapped in my nightmares. The past had no meaning. The future was unknowable. The only certainty was a lonely death, and with any luck, an eternity of silence in a pauper's grave, solitude, silence, and a blissful void. My image in the mirror gave me a stern look and said, "Wake up, 17. You're asleep on your feet. Put your hands up and move." Beads of sweat started rolling down my forehead. I couldn't breathe. I leaned against the counter and gasped. "I can't do this. I want to stay asleep." My reflection growled. "No, it's time to wake up." It leaned forward and popped me with a left hook to the chin. My knees unhinged and I fell into the past. I was now inside the cage from my dream. A man was standing over me, his hands planted on his hips. I didn't know his name. No one had a name at the farm. The boys were numbered from 1 to 30, and our trainer was known as the director. We weren't allowed to speak unless we were spoken to first. The punishment for talking was a swift beating. There weren't any second chances at the farm, only repercussions. I was number 17. The old 17 had died shortly after my arrival, and I was his replacement. Calmly, the director said, "You try to lean away from that hook, you would have been better to roll under it. Get up and try again." All the other boys were surrounding the outside cage, silently watching the lesson unfold. I squared up again, and this time I almost managed to avoid his fist. It glanced off the top of my skull, and I was dropped a second later. The director watched with a look of serene indifference as I struggled to get up, his hands clasped together behind his back. My head was ringing like a bell. "If you bent your knees a little more, it would have missed. Try again." I dodged the third swing, and the director rewarded me with a kick to the liver. I went down hard, and I stayed there. He looked around at the other boys and said, "If the first strike misses the mark, there's probably another one coming right behind it. Be ready for it." He held up 3 fingers and said, "Remember these 3 words, gentlemen. Anticipate, evade, retaliate. These words might keep you alive." I saw his foot rise into the air, and I rolled away just in time to avoid a stomp on the head. The director clapped his hands together and called out, "17 needs a break. Who's next?" "No volunteers." "Get in here, 6. It's your turn." The director hauled me off the floor with one hand and tossed me through the door like a bag of trash. When I got to my feet, I found myself standing in the present again, alone in the restroom of an abandoned warehouse. I finally understood something. The dead boy wasn't a ghost. It was my stolen innocence. I was no longer asleep. I was waking up. And it was time for a reckoning. Christy didn't come back that night. She didn't come back the next day either. The day after that, I went looking for her. I spent hours combing the neighborhood, but she was nowhere to be found. She was just gone. It gave me an uneasy feeling in my stomach. Why would she abruptly stop coming back? Where else would she go? Just about every dime Christy ever made on the corner went directly into her arm. She didn't have the money to rent a room somewhere. It was the middle of winter. It was all very troubling, including the depths of my anxiety at her absence. Even if she didn't know it, we shared a dreadful bond from the murky days of the past. Wherever she was, I hope she was okay. That night, another nightmare came to me in the darkness, and another fragment of the past dropped into place. I was doing physical training with the rest of the captives. This happened every day after breakfast. However, we didn't have any breakfast on this particular morning. We didn't have any breakfast the day before either, nor any lunch or supper. One of us had committed some vague transgression against the rules, and now we were all being starved. The director referred to this punitive measure as a time of cleansing. It was a common punishment at the farm. It could last anywhere from one missed meal to several days of hunger and misery. The director would usually keep us confined to the bunk room during a time of cleansing. On this occasion, Christy's dad came and ordered us to get ready for a workout. He herded us outside at gunpoint, and we were marched into the converted barn where the fights took place. It was known as the arena. This is where we did most of our training, with the cage looming behind us like a Neolithic monument to bloodshed. The director was already waiting for us. He announced that anyone who failed to make it to the end would be taken away. The workouts were always intense, but this one was absolutely brutal. At this point, we hadn't eaten in at least 36 hours. One by one, the other boys started dropping like flies around me. Whenever someone hit the floor, the director would order Chrissy's dad to drag him out of the building. We would hear a muffled gunshot from somewhere out in the barnyard, and then he would come back alone. The workout dragged on and on. Every minute felt like an hour. My sight was fading, my ears were ringing, and I was shaking from hunger, but I grimly forced myself to continue. I performed endless push-ups, sit-ups, jumping jacks, and squats, shaking like a leaf from exhaustion and terror. Before long, there was only 8 of us left, and then 4, and then 2. And then it was only me, trembling and sweating as I struggled to squeeze out another push-up. I barely managed to get my arms fully extended, screeching in anguish as I trembled my way up to the top. I knew I wouldn't be able to do it again. I fought with all of my heart and soul to push myself up a 3rd time. I wasn't going to make it. It was over. The director suddenly blew the whistle. My arms instantly gave out and I smacked my face into the cement floor. Blood came gushing out of my nose in a torrent. I rolled away from the puddle and tried to stand up, but my legs would no longer support my weight. I promptly collapsed in a heap. I was barely conscious, but I was alive. I won. Or so I thought. Someone dragged me like a sack of potatoes all the way back to the farmhouse. As I crawled through the back door, the smell of fresh baking hit my nostrils. My stomach immediately started growling. I climbed the stairs on all fours, groaning with every movement, and I crawled the hall to the bunk room. There was a folding table set up in the middle of the room. It was loaded with freshly baked pies and pastries from the kitchen downstairs. There were 5 pitchers of cold lemonade as well, full of ice cubes and dripping beads of condensation down the outside of the glass. No one was dead. The other kids were all eating and drinking with a look of absolute rapture on their faces. It had all been just another grotesque mind game to break our spirits. I should have been furious. But I didn't care in the least. I was starving, and there was food. I forced myself to stand up, and I started lurching over to the table. I was swiftly shoved to the floor by a foot on my back. I rolled over and looked up in a daze. I saw the director standing there. His hands were clasped behind his back in a scholarly fashion. He shook his head and dragged me away from the table by my foot. Gently, he said, "Not you, 17. Go sit on your bunk until everyone here is finished." I stared at him without comprehension. All I knew was pain, exhaustion, and the maddening smell of food in the air. I croaked, "But I'm the only one who made it to the end." He shrugged at me and replied, "Not the end until I say it is. Go to your bunk." I was devastated. My eyes teared up against my will. I whispered, it's not fair. No one else made it to the end. I won. He gave me a vague smile and replied, "What end? There's no end here, you thick-headed idiot. Has anyone ever been fair? Of course not. There's no justice in this world, 17. There's only dominance and misery. Haven't you figured this out yet?" He turned to Christy's dad and told him, "Take 17 outside, put him on the stake. He needs some time for self-reflection." I couldn't walk very far on my own power, so I was dragged across the ground once again to the edge of the cornfield. An 8-foot length of chain was locked around my neck. The other end of the chain was attached to a wooden pole in the ground. Receiving time for self-reflection was another common punishment on the farm. There was no predicting the length of a punishment. It could last an hour, or it could last for days on end. I was too exhausted to bear the weight of the chain, and as soon as it locked around my neck, it dragged me to the ground. I curled up in a ball, and I started to cry. Christy's dad rubbed his palms over his eyes. He glanced over at the farmhouse across the barnyard, and then he knelt down beside me. He quietly said, "Listen to me, kid. I'm going to get you out of here. I'm working on it." He shushed me with a raised finger and hissed, "No, you can't know anything yet. Don't ask questions. I don't have the answers yet anyway. All I know for sure is that we can't go to the cops. The people involved here, they got more money than you can imagine. Everyone is in their pocket. The cops, the lawyers, the judges, the politicians, everyone. We have to get the message directly to all the regular people. That's our only chance." He hushed me again when I tried to speak. He whispered, "We've got to go to the newspapers, the magazines, TV stations on TV. If we go to the cops first, we'll disappear." His eyes darted back to the farmhouse as he fished something out of his pocket. He said, "Hide this in the bunk room somewhere and forget it exists. Don't even tell yourself about it. Not until it's time to use it." He dropped a shiny object in the grass between us, and he turned to leave. I reached for his pant leg and croaked, "What if I can't make it that long?" Christy's dad gave me a bleak stare. He looked like he hadn't caught a decent night's sleep in a long time. He murmured, "I think you got a better chance than most of them. Just take it day by day, do whatever you got to do to stay alive." I waited until he was gone before I started searching for the object he dropped on the ground. The barnyard hadn't been mowed in a while, so it was lost somewhere in a green void of weeds and long grass. I had to clamp down on a scream of frustration and keep methodically searching inch by inch until I found it. I pulled it out of the grass with a trembling hand, and my heart skipped a beat. I was holding the key. A vague feeling of warmth spread across my chest. For the first time since the day of my kidnapping, I saw a faint glow at the end of the tunnel. I'd kill whoever I had to kill in order to make it to the light. If necessary, I'd kill them all. Nothing mattered except my freedom. A cold hand gripped my shoulder, and the memory shattered into pieces. I half expected to see the director standing there when I opened my eyes, but it wasn't him. It was the dead boy. He put a finger to his lips and pointed at the door. I was instantly wide awake. I whispered, "Who is it?" The dead boy drew a line across his neck with his finger, and then he melted into the shadows. I tiptoed across my makeshift bedroom in the dim red glow of my alarm clock. Morty's revolver was clutched in my sweaty hands. I held my breath and listened at the door. After a few seconds, I heard the faint squeak of a rubber sole against the hallway tile. My stomach dropped like an elevator. I had a fleeting hope it was Christy out there, both alive and well, but I knew it wasn't true. It was them. They had been looking for me just as I was looking for them, and they found me. The stealthy footsteps paused in front of the door. I waited until the knob started to turn and I fired 3 rounds through the door at chest height. It was painfully loud in the enclosed space of the bedroom. I jumped to the side, barely avoiding getting shot numerous times in return. The air buzzed with the whine of ricocheting bullets. It struck my digital alarm clock and it exploded in a spray of plastic. I could hear the rattling and gurgling of a sucking chest wound. I hit the light switch, illuminating the intruders in a glow of fluorescent tubes overhead. He was struggling to push himself to a sitting position against the wall. I kicked him in the face hard enough to put the back of his skull through the drywall. I did it again, and once more for good measure. From what I could see of him, he looked like a typical hard case. A goon for hire. Behind that, it was hard to discern anything about his facial features. Along with the repeated kicks to the face, one of my bullets had struck him square in the mouth. He had nothing in his pockets except a spare magazine for his pistol. I dragged him into my former bedroom and closed the door. It was now my former bedroom because I could no longer stay in this place. When his assassin failed to report back to him, Paul Stevens would undoubtedly send more of them. This place was no longer safe. It was time to move on to the last stage of my awakening. I went out to the warehouse to grab a jerry can of old gasoline the previous had left behind. I left a side door open so the raccoons could escape. Then I splashed the gas on anything flammable through the office side of the building. I had tears in my eyes as I twisted up a cone of office paper. This place was the closest thing to a real home I'd ever known. Safety, security, and a sense of belonging. All of it gone. I swung the exit door shut on the flames. And that was that. The time of hiding from my past year was over. I knew about them, they knew about me, and one of us was going to die before the end of the day. The sky was starting to get lighter in the east. I walked for many blocks until I found an all-night donut shop. He sat in a corner and brooded over a paper cup of watery hot chocolate. There were sirens wailing in the distance, the swan song to my broken life. My home was gone, my possessions were gone, my only companion was missing. I had nothing, and I was nothing. I slowly became aware of someone watching me through the window. It was the dead boy. As we stared at each other through the dirty glass, the long dead and the never living, I realized I still had one possession left. One beautiful and precious possession. I had the ability to kill. I felt my eyelids grow heavy in the hushed atmosphere of the coffee shop. I let myself drift into the mist that lies between wakefulness and sleep, and I waited for the sun to dawn on my last day, as an aimless nomad. I had a purpose now. My rage was the spark, my misery was the fuel, and the evil men who destroyed my life would be consumed in the resulting inferno. I might burn along with them, but that was okay. We could all burn together, and in the smoldering aftermath, I would find peace. Paul Stevens Contracting was located in a decaying industrial block, the mirror image of my own former neighborhood. It was all potholes and cracking concrete, empty parking lots and rusting billboards. The buildings were sandwiched between 2 abandoned factories, both of them riddled with broken windows. The entire property was surrounded with a barbed wire fence, and the gate was locked with a heavy chain and a padlock. This time my disguise was simply me as myself, a homeless-looking guy in ragged clothes. To add to the effect, I was holding an empty bottle in a paper bag, just another drunken bum in the street, idling the frigid hours away with a cheap bottle of booze. I sat in the cold for nearly an hour and scouted out the property from across the road. A large man in a bomber jacket was patrolling the grounds every 20 minutes or so. The level of security seemed a bit excessive for a contracting company. Also, there weren't any work trucks or cargo vans in the parking lot. Instead, there was a handful of expensive luxury cars huddled close to the front entrance, including a Mercedes and a BMW. I had a feeling that Paul's contracting work was of the more illegal variety. There was only one way to get past the fence. I'd have to somehow coerce the security thug into unlocking the gate. There was only one way that would happen. I'd have to make him angry enough to come after me in the street. I weaved across the street with a belligerent stagger. The guard slowed his step and watched as I leaned against the fence and started unzipping my pants. He pointed at me and yelled, "Hey, get out of here! Go do your business somewhere else!" I hollered back, "Oh, go fuck yourself," and proceeded to urinate on a support post. Paul's security goon came storming over to the gate, his eyes shining at the prospect of violence. He growled, "Nah, you don't tell me to go fuck myself, you drunk piece of shit. Get the fuck out of here. Go on." I zipped up and gave him a nasty grin, swaying around with an alcoholic's precarious lack of balance. I slurred, "Why don't you make me leave? I bet you won't. I bet you won't do shit." The guard kicked the fence between us with a size 14 boot. He snarled, "Last warning, get moving." I responded by hurling the bottle at the fence between us. It exploded against the frigid metal in a spray of glass. I spread my arms wide and slurred, "Make me, bitch!" Mr. Security Henchman was done with my bullshit. In a flash, he unlocked the gate and came thundering outside with his fists clenched. He was a good 5 inches taller than me, and he was built like a refrigerator. A lightning bolt of adrenaline slammed across my nervous system, hot and sizzling. I knew this feeling very well. It was simultaneously the best and worst feeling imaginable. My heart rate jumped into high gear and my senses became painfully sharp. It felt like I was ascending to a higher level of consciousness. It was overwhelming, terrifying, and exhilarating all at once. It was like being reborn. Above all, it was familiar. I had been in this exact same situation many, many times in the past. I was about to fight, and the outcome would be either victory or death. My reality abruptly fractured in two. Here in the present, I was circling away from an opponent on a cold, wintry street. At the same time, I was circling away from a different opponent inside a massive steel cage. It was oppressively hot in there, and the noise of the crowd was disorienting. It was my first fight, and I was scared out of my mind. I was slated to face my bunkmate that night. The kid who told me I'd soon die in the cage. His number was 14, and this was his 10th fight. The house was taking wagers as usual, but only a few of the spectators bothered to place a bet. According to the digital screen high up on the wall, the odds against me were 100 to 1. Before the match began, the director strolled into the cage to have a quick word with 14. My bunkmate nodded at his words as he stared at me over his shoulder. There was a predatory gleam in his eye. When he was done talking to 14, the director ambled over to my corner and grasped me by the arm. He said, "Do you see all these people out there? They came to watch you die." I started to hyperventilate. I wiped the sweat out of my eyes and gasped, Yes, sir, I know." The director's eyes were as blue and serene as the midsummer day. He said, "Mercy doesn't exist behind these bars. One of you is going to die tonight. Remember everything I've taught you, and maybe you'll come out of this alive." The director turned away from me, raising his hand at someone in the control room as he headed for the door. There was a sharp clang as he swung it shut behind him, and he locked it. 14 was shadowboxing and jumping around, sweat glistening on his skinny torso. His expression was blank, but his eyes were burning in their sockets. The lights above the crowd went dim, and the announcer's smooth, deep voice came echoing out of the sound system. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Our first match tonight features number 17, the newcomer in the red trunks. He's facing 10-time veteran of the cage, a savage with the heart of a lion. So please put your hands together for number 14. There was a tidal wave of cheering in the audience. 14 raised his fist in the air. He was already a crowd favorite. They all wanted to see him win again. I could feel their collective disdain for me and their applause. They were excited to watch me die. The announcer bellowed, "Fighters, get ready! 4, 3, 2, and go! As soon as the shrill whine of the buzzer filled the smoky air, 14 came boiling across the cage at a dead run. I jumped to the side and narrowly avoided being tackled to the floor. 14 rolled to his feet in a nimble somersault, and he charged at me again. I dodged away from a storm of windmill punches, and I ran for the opposite corner. My endless hours of training had flown out the window when the buzzer went off. I was too scared to fight back. I was too scared to think. All I could do was run. I was relentlessly chased around the cage as the crowd screamed abuse at me. I stumbled when I was trying to pivot, and he nailed me with a hard shot to the back of the head, and I went down with stars exploding behind my eyes. The audience hollered their approval. I tried to roll out of the way, but 14 landed on me with all of his weight cracking 2 of my ribs on impact. He pinned my flailing arms to the floor with his knees, and he leaned down to bite my face. I twisted away from his snapping teeth as he clamped down on my ear instead. It burned like fire. My agonizing wails made the crowd go wild. My opponent spat a chunk of my mangled ear across the cage. Then he went back in for a piece of my nose. I smacked the top of my head into his mouth, breaking his front teeth in the process. I yanked one of my arms free and grabbed the back of his head, pulling him down to latch onto his cheek. I shook my head like a dog and his flesh tore open between my teeth, hot coppery blood spurting into my mouth. 14 let out a scream and grabbed my testicles, squeezing them with both hands. A wave of agony jolted into my stomach and I released my bear trap on his face. He battered my face with some wild punches, and then I bucked him off to the side. He tried to jump on me again, and I pummeled him with a few donkey kicks to create some space. We both gained our feet, and 14 came at me with a blizzard of wild punches. I tagged him with a hand jab to the nose, and then I laid him down with a right across the chin. My opponent hit the floor, and I jumped on him. He immediately dug his thumbs into my eyes. I shut my eyelids tight against the assault and grabbed his thumbs, bending them backwards until they both snapped. I dragged his arms down by his broken digits and pinned them to the floor with my knees. I was dimly aware that we were both screeching at the top of our lungs, but our cries were lost beneath the ecstatic roaring of the crowd. Reality had been reduced to spurting blood and rancid sweat, pain inflicted and pain received. The fear was gone. There was only murder in my heart. I felt a feral species of joy at the look of terror on his face. I would kill him for hurting me so terribly. I'd destroy him. I started driving my elbows into his unprotected face. His nose exploded, his cheekbones snapped, his eye sockets shattered. But I wasn't done yet. My mind was lost in a tidal wave of violence. There was no crowd, no cage, nothing at all except the brutal task at hand. 14 was unconscious at this point, but I still wasn't done. I broke both of his arms, and then I repeatedly stomped on his head. His body went stiff from the resulting brain trauma, but I still wasn't done. I started jumping on him like a trampoline. I felt his ribs cave in beneath my feet. When the director finally came in to pull me off, I was trying my best to rip away his lower jaw. He thrust my arm into the air and the buzzer went off. It was over. My opponent was dying on the floor and I was the victor. The entire arena was on their feet, bellowing and delirious with bloodshed. In the dim, smoky atmosphere of the arena, they looked like a horde of demons, screeching and flailing their arms in an ecstasy of murderlust. The PA thundered to life as the announcer shouted, "And the winner is Ruthless Rookie, the child beast with the killer instinct, number 17! I yanked my arm out of the director's grasp. I leapt up to cling to the bars of the cage. I roared back at the mob with blood-smeared mouth, and they were absolutely wild. As the director dragged me away from the cage in a wrist lock, the audience was chanting, 17! 17! 17! My mindless fury drained away by the time I got back to the dormitory, leaving me in a dreamlike state of shock. The bunk above mine had already been stripped of its sheets. There would soon be a new 14 to replace my fallen opponent, and the cycle would begin again. The director brought out a first aid kit. He started disinfecting, snipping, and stitching at my wounds with his usual air of calm detachment. It was a horrible and painful process. By the time the director was finished patching me up, I was trembling all over. He leaned down to look me in the eye, and I cowered away from him. I was expecting a punch in the head for being unable to hide my pain, but he didn't hurt me. Instead, he quietly murmured, "That was impressive. Probably the most impressive debut I've ever seen." The director paused to let that sink in, and then he added, "You have the potential to become a great fighter, 17. Time will tell. Here, take this. You've earned it." The director gave me a hint of a smile as he pushed something into my hand, and then he left me alone in my bunk. As soon as the door closed behind him, my entire being clenched like a fist and started sobbing into my pillow. When the tears ran dry, I remembered the object that was clenched in my hand. It was a candy bar. I curled up on my side and cradled it to my chest. My heart was broken, but it was also boiling with hatred. I hated the farm. I hated the armed guards who watched over us. I hated all the other captives, and I hated the spectators who paid to watch us kill each other. But most of all, I hated the director. He had beaten me, tortured me, and starved me on many occasions. Mere wounds could not convey how much I hated him, but I still ate the candy bar, and that made me hate him even more. I vowed I'd face him in the cage someday. The last thing he would see before his vision faded to black would be the flame of defiance in my eyes, the flame that he failed to extinguish with his cruelty, and when his last breath came rattling out of his chest, this filthy world would become just a little bit cleaner. The memory drifted away like a puff of steam into the cold air, leaving me standing in the middle of the road with a corpse at my feet. His face was a mess. The heel of my boot had left a horrible dent between his eyebrows. I dragged him into the narrow gap between the crusty snowbank and the fence, and I slipped through the open gate. I came bursting through the door of the front entrance with Morty's gun in my hand. I pointed it at a middle-aged woman who was sitting at the reception desk. I told her to keep quiet and show me her hands. She looked up from her computer screen and met my gaze with a complete lack of concern. She said, "We've been expecting you." I was pretty sure I knew this woman. She was older now, but her face was familiar. I growled, "I know you. You sat at the table. You watched me starve." She gave me a polite smile and replied, "Yes, I did. My name is Rosemary. I was the housemaid out at the farm. Now I'm a bookkeeper. You have to adapt to stay relevant these days." I demanded, "Where's Paul Stevens?" She made a vague gesture with her hands. "Well," she said quietly, "he's standing behind you with a gun pointed at the back of your head." Something cold and hard tapped against the base of my skull. A familiar voice said, "Don't move. Drop your weapon. Take it away from you. Good. Now put your hands in the air." A hand searched through my pockets. It confiscated my knife, my notepad, and half a roll of duct tape. The voice instructed me to walk down the hall and keep my hands in the air. 2 men were waiting for me at the end of the hall. One of them put a gun against my ribs, and they took me to an empty room. I was tied to a wooden chair and left alone for a while. There was only the chair, a tarp covering something on the floor, and a single naked light bulb dangling from the ceiling. Large patches of the concrete floor were stained a murky reddish-brown color. I spotted a drain in the middle of the room, and I stared at it with mounting apprehension. Not good. I craned my head around to have a look behind me. I saw a coil of garden hose attached to a faucet on the wall behind me. Not good at all. After a long, agonizing wait, the door swung open, and a man stepped into the room. My heart lurched in my chest. It was him. My kidnapper. my tormentor, the boogeyman that haunted me in my forgotten dreams. He was holding my notepad in one hand and a pistol in the other. He gave me a placid smile and murmured, "It really is you. I can hardly believe it. You recognize me? My name's Paul Stevens, but you knew me as the director," I interjected. He raised an eyebrow at the venom in my tone. He waved the notepad in the air and said, "I gave you a gift. You've been wasting it, living like a bum in an abandoned warehouse. Such a shame." I responded, "Everything is a shame. The entire world is a shame. How did you find me?" "Oh, it wasn't too difficult. After I got the news about Morty, I had people out knocking on doors. There are cameras everywhere these days. When you're involved in that sort of business I specialize in, it pays to be paranoid. But we narrowed down your location. We eventually made contact with your street-walking house guest. She told me everything I need to know." He looked slightly amused. Now imagine my surprise when I discovered who her father was. The universe works in mysterious ways. She didn't know about this unique connection between us all. I can understand why you didn't tell her. It's quite a story, isn't it? He gave me a questioning glance and added, "She says you talk to an imaginary friend sometime. She says she thinks you're a bit mentally unstable. Not uncommon for someone in your circumstances, I suppose. That true?" I kept quiet and waited. Paul waited along with me. After a while, he saw that I wasn't going to answer the question, and he waved it off and plowed onward. Well, as I was listening to her talk, I kept thinking to myself, is it 17? Is that even possible? I looked for you for many years, never found you. I assumed you were long dead, but here you are. I'm glad you're still around, and everything's happened. I think we both need some closure." He held up his hand and said, "I'm not angry about Morty, by the way. He was on his way out regardless of your interference. The booze, the drugs, self-loathing, it's a vicious cycle. That's the thing about guilt. It's a spiritual cancer. Eats your inner strength. I probably should have done it myself a long time ago." The sound of my old name was setting me on edge. I'm not a number anymore, by the way. My name is David. Paul snorted. "What? Nonsense, I created you. Your name's whatever I say it is, and you're terrible at breaking and entering, by the way. Sawing a hole through the door, that's ridiculous. You can't pick a lock. Should have just popped it open with a pry bar." It was my first time. Give me a break. You didn't create me, by the way. You stole me. Paul leaned down to look me in the eye. "And who were you before you were stolen? What would you have become? I doubt the outcome would have been much different. You remember anything about your life before the cage, no? It's because you didn't have one. You were bouncing around the foster care system since you were a toddler. No one cared about you. You were disposable." The director waved my notepad in the air. Then he slightly swatted me across the face with it. "You want to take revenge on me, don't you? Me, the man who scooped you up from the rabble, turned you into a warrior, a child, like a fresh lump of clay waiting to be molded into whatever you wish. But not all clay is created equal, 17. You were special. I can still remember your first time in the cage. You froze up in the beginning. But when you finally snapped into reality of your situation, oh, that was impressive. I can remember thinking to myself, this one was born to fight. 99 fights, undefeated in the entire history of the operation. Only one fighter had more victories than you." Paul started aimlessly walking around the room. "You're not the only one who's been living under an assumed identity," he said in a casual tone. "Paul Stevens isn't my birth name. I had no idea what my birth name was. Nor do I care at all. Just like you, I was a neglected child. I never knew my father, and when I was 9 years old, my mother traded me to a stranger for drugs. He took me away. Do you know where I ended up?" He nudged the tarp on the floor with the toe of his shoe. I ended up at a farm in the middle of nowhere. I started crying. Big, rough-looking man walked over, slapped me to the ground. He knelt down beside me. He said, "Forget about the outside world. You're never going back." And from that day on, I started training to fight in the cage. Paul was amused by the look of shock on my face. "Why are you surprised? You think I was born with a silver spoon in my mouth? Every hardship you experienced at the farm, all the pain, all the humiliation and suffering, I had once received the exact same treatment. I learned at the feet of a master." I was speechless. I watched him wander around for a bit and tried to process the new information. Finally, I croaked, "You were a victim, and then you turned around and became the oppressor. I just... Holy shit, man. Why?" Paul snorted. "I wasn't a victim. I was a lump of clay. And then I became something much better. I was different from the rest of them. I didn't break, I adapted. And then I started to thrive." There was a gleam of wistful yearning in his eye, as if he felt nostalgic for the good old days. He smiled up at the ceiling and said, "I look forward to stepping into the cage. I won fight after fight over and over again. No one could beat me. After 100 fights, the director took me aside and said, 'That was the last one. You aren't making us money anymore. People are starting to talk. They're starting to wonder about you. Some of them think you're not a regular human being. They say you're immortal.' And after that day, I was no longer a captive," Paul said, with obvious pride. "I took my place at the director's side, and he taught me how to run the operation." Paul turned to face me. His expression was pallid and neutral, but his tone was thick with emotion. "I became a man. I decided it was time to take over. The director was getting old. There was nothing more he could teach me. I knew I was stronger than him. I was faster and better in every way, so I challenged him to face me in the cage. I told him, 'Winner takes all.' He agreed to the fight. Then he tried to flee the country. I sent his own man to grab him at the airport." "Why didn't you let him go? Wouldn't it have been easier that way?" "Well," Paul sighed, "you'd probably think so, but no. And that's for a very good reason. He knew too much. Names, dates, financial details, all kinds of dangerous information. Someone in that position has to be accounted for every single day of their life, right up until they die. Or certain people start getting nervous. So these people must understand what they're doing is wrong, then." Paul chose to ignore me. He continued his story. With great distaste, he said, "The man was a fraud. He was begging for mercy. The sheer hypocrisy of his whining and crying, good Lord, drove me into a rage. I ordered all his men to gather round so they could witness the fate of a coward." Paul smiled fondly at this memory. "And when I was done with him, I told my men, bury him in the cornfield with the rest of them." That's exactly where he went. A shallow grave between the rows, nameless, forgotten, or rotten in the ground. And from that moment on, I was the new director. A dark shadow passed behind his eyes. He suddenly pointed the gun at my head. My heart was slamming in my chest, but I kept my expression neutral. Paul cleared the tightness from his throat and said, "It was more than just a business to me, 17. The cage was my altar. People would travel from all corners of the globe to worship at that altar, and the rich and powerful were my congregation. When you ran off and you burned it down, you ruined me in every conceivable manner. I spent a fortune to bury the investigation. Everyone came along with their hand out, I wanted to kill you, but I couldn't find you. I searched high and low, but you were nowhere to be found. As the last sentence was leaving his mouth, my reality split down the middle. Christy's dad was whispering in my ear. It happens tonight. Listen for that clock to chime 4 times. At exactly 4 a.m., it's time to go. Use that key I gave you to unlock the door of the bunk room. I'll take care of the rest. Just come outside, and I'll be waiting. But something went wrong. Because now I was watching the director beat him up behind the farmhouse. A group of his henchmen was cheering him on. Morty was one of them. When the director knocked him down for the last time, Morty spat on him. And then I was crawling across the floor of the bunk room in the darkness. The key was clutched in my sweaty hand. The bunk room was locked with a deadbolt that had been reversed, so they could be locked from the outside without a key. No one had ever gotten around to blocking the keyhole on the other side. I was terrified the key wouldn't work, but it did. I was free. This was followed by a slideshow of extreme violence against the unsuspecting guards. It was the dead hours of a long, boring night shift. They were sleepy and complacent. None of them were prepared for a stealth attack from inside the farmhouse. I watched myself bash a guard in the skull with a paperweight. I grabbed a carving knife on my way through the kitchen, and I buried it straight up to the handle in another guard's neck. I encountered the last one out on the back porch. He was slouched on the top step with his back to the door. I could see his cigarette smoke curling lazily in the glow of a kerosene lamp. I heard the door open and asked what's up over his shoulder. I crossed the space between us in a second. There was a brief struggle, and then I was clinging to his back with my arms around his neck. The guard fell backwards to crush me against the creaky old planks beneath us. I tensed myself against the impact, and I grimly held on. Right before he lost consciousness, he started kicking his legs wildly, and the kerosene lamp went flying in a shower of glass, fuel spilling across the old wood, and the flames roared to life. I quickly released the hold and scuttled off the porch. A few seconds later, the guard woke up to his legs on fire. The fabric of his kerosene-splattered jeans was melting into his skin. He bounced to his feet and ran down the steps, screeching like a banshee as he tried to pull them off. His shirt also caught fire, followed by his long, greasy tangle of hair. Instead of rolling to smother the flames, the guard panicked and sprinted in the direction of the irrigation pond. He was a human candle, lighting up the darkness of the barnyard as he ran into the night. He collapsed into a blazing heap long before he reached the pond. Behind me, the entire porch was now engulfed in flames. It was old and explosively flammable. The fire was already lapping at the side of the house. My eyes were drawn to movement at a window on the second story. It was the bunk room. Hands were pounding on the glass, but it was in vain. The glass was several inches thick, and it was shatterproof. With a nasty jolt, I remembered that I had locked the door behind me when I snuck into the hallway. The rest of the kids were trapped in there, and they were going to burn to death. I scrambled around the side of the house to the front door. I tried to bash it in with various objects on hand, including a cinder block and a log from the woodpile, but it was useless. All the doors had been reinforced with steel plates. I hurled the log at a window, and it was almost flattened when it came bouncing back at me. At this time, the fire was enveloping the entire back of the house. The heat was becoming too much to bear. I knew that a mob of the director's goons would soon be racing to the scene very shortly. Probably also the director himself. There was nothing I could do for the kids who were trapped upstairs. I had to go. I was aware that Paul Stevens was still yapping away in the background, but I couldn't hear what he was saying. I was looking down at Christy's dad in the flickering light of the house fire. He had been chained to the stake in the far reaches of the barnyard. His face was a lumpy, swollen mask of dried blood. I thought he was already dead, but one of the eyelids fluttered open, revealing a murky, bloodshot eye. The other eye socket was now an empty, gaping hole. It was starting to smell bad. My would-be savior reached for my shoe with a trembling hand. His lips skinned back from his broken teeth, and he gasped, "It's burning up. The others make it out." I mutely shook my head. I couldn't bring myself to tell him what happened. It was too horrible to speak out loud. He rasped, "God have mercy on us all. What a mess." I didn't tell him anything. He beat me up and tortured me, but I wouldn't talk. He dug my eyes out with a spoon. I wouldn't talk. I said, "Let me keep the other one so I can look for you in hell." Told him he's a low-life piece of shit. That was all. Christy's dad clutched his belly and groaned. "It hurts. Look, forget about all the other shit. You can still get out of here just like we planned it. Run through the cornfield, cross the road, run through the next one. They'll be waiting for you on the other side." I asked, "What about you?" And Christy's dad coughed up a gout of thick red blood in response. "I ain't going nowhere, kid. Listen to me for a minute, okay? I want you to know something. I want you to know I'm not actually a bad person. I'm here because I needed the money. I can't work a regular job. I'm a fuck-up. I've always been that way, I know that, but us fuck-ups, we got families too. I have a wife and a little girl. Her name is Kristen." He paused to cough up some more bloody phlegm, and I realized that I could see him more clearly now. Dawn was coming. He struggled to take in a breath, and he said, "If you ever cross her path, tell her your daddy loved you very much, and he's sorry. Promise you'll do that for me." He waved me off and rasped, "Go on, get out of here before they leave you behind." And then I was running through the cornfield as fast as I could. The overgrown grass was dragging at my feet. Behind me, bright orange flames were stretching up to meet the sky. I plowed through the outer row of corn stalks and kept running. The leaves were dripping wet from the morning dew. I put my arms up to keep them from slapping me in the face, but I was still getting soaked. The water was hitting me in the face, and I was almost choking. I snapped back into the present, and I discovered I was being sprayed in the face with a garden hose on the wall. Paul released the trigger and said, "You left for a while, 17. You're having a conversation with thin air." I guess Christy was right. You're not well. When I was done coughing up water, I choked, "Where is she?" "I want to see her. I have something I need to tell her." Paul strolled over to the tarp that was heaped in the corner of the room. He said, "She's under here. You sure you want to see her?" I felt an immediate surge of rage. I strained against the ropes that were binding me to the chair and yelled, "Why? You horrible piece of shit! You didn't have to do that!" Paul gave me a stern look. He replied, "But I did have to do that. See, she saw my face. Honestly, it's your own fault. Happened because you came back to poke the hornet's nest. Happened because you refused to let sleeping dogs lie." Closed my eyes against the tears that wanted to flow. I was done crying. It never helped. Your victim mentality makes me sick. I think we all done catching up here, don't you? Just a few more questions, we can wrap this up. Now, this has been bothering me. So you went missing for 18 years. No sign of you, no trace at all, just gone. So where did you go? The dogs lost your scent at the side of the road. Someone must have been waiting for you in a vehicle, so who was it? Why did they choose to get involved in the first place? Where did they take you? What happened after that? Really love some answers here, 17. Help me out. Slowly, I responded. I can remember seeing a car when I came running out of the corn. A blue sedan of some kind. The back door popped open. I got inside. That's all I can remember. Paul could see I was telling the truth. His lips pressed together in an angry line. He poked his head out into the hallway and shouted, "Hey, someone come bring me another tarp." He gave me a somber look and said, "There's no point in drawing this out any longer. It's a shame. 99 victories under your belt. You're so very, very close." He shook his head at me, a gesture of sorrow and regret. Timing of your appearance in my life, it's all very strange. It turned up just as I was preparing to start the operation again. In today's world, 18 years is a long time. No one even remembers that fire. The rumors are long dead. The new arena puts the old one to shame. It's too bad you're, shall we say, broken. Gonna use someone like you to assist with training the new batch of fighters. I faintly murmured, yeah, you're broken too. You just don't know it. Paul's lips twisted upward with a slight grin. Me? No, not at all. I'm a complete and entirely cohesive trinity of mind, body, and spirit. You, on the other hand, are a colossal waste of potential. You could have been something remarkable. But now you're just nothing. The two burly, shovel-faced thugs hurried into the room, both of them carrying a folded-up tarp in their arms. One of them rumbled, "We brought you two of them just in case." Paul didn't answer him. He was watching me instead. His smug grin faded as my own lips curled in a wide, hateful smile. He waved the gun in my face and grunted. "What? What's so funny, 17? My smile got even wider. I said, "I don't think anything's funny. I don't really understand humor. I'm smiling because you're wrong. You think my story's over, but it's actually just beginning." Paul gave me a look of disbelief. "What the hell are you talking about? Are you completely detached from reality?" Why am I tied to a chair?" "It's because you're full of shit, that's why. You say you're immortal, but you're scared of me, and you should be scared because I can take you." Paul's eyes went narrow. "What did you just say to me?" "I'm scared. I'm not scared of anything under the sun, you pathetic idiot." I coughed up some harsh laughter and snorted. "Bullshit. I can recognize fear when I see it. I'm something of an expert. My entire life's been dominated by fear. It's been that way for as long as I can remember." The director started to curse me out, and I barked, "Be quiet! You think you're some kind of unstoppable supervillain because what, you won 100 fights in the cage? Well, I'm right behind you. I just need one more kick at the can. You want revenge? Me too, asshole, so fight me in the cage." Paul stiffly replied, "That's pointless. I'm not gonna do that." I nodded to myself and replied, "Yeah, thought so. Well, if you don't do it, you're a coward. And your men will never respect you ever again. For someone like you, respect is everything, isn't it? You rule by intimidation. If you lose that respect, why would they take orders from you? Why wouldn't they just kill you and take over the operation? Look behind you. They're all watching." The two lackeys with the tarps had been joined by at least 10 others. They were huddled together out in the hallway, observing our conversation unfold with great interest. Paul turned to stare at them, and they all stared right back. Their faces were neutral, but their eyes were bright and watchful. Paul grunted. "Someone get him out of the chair and take him to the arena." As he stormed out of the room, I called out, "Watch him! If he runs from this fight, he'll go straight to the feds and cut himself a deal. It's the only way he could stay alive, and he'll throw you all under the bus without a single thought. He's a coward." Paul whirled around, his hands balled into fists, and shouted, "You'll suffer for that!" I repeated, "Watch him, fellas!" And I chuckled to myself when they all started following him down the hall. One of them stayed behind to cut me loose from my chair. He grudgingly said, "You got more guts than me, bud. Give you that. Wouldn't square up to that guy. He's killed more people than I've known." I stood up and rubbed the pins and needles, feeling away as the blood rushed back to my hands. I asked him, "What's your name?" He reluctantly answered, "My name's Larry. What's it to you?" I looked him in the eye and said, "That's what's going to happen, Larry. I'm going to kill your boss in that cage. I'm going to walk out of here, and after today, you and all the rest of those dirtbags are going to change your ways. You're going to fly the straight and narrow for the rest of your lives, because if you don't, I'll come back for you, and I'll kill you." Larry aimed his gun at my chest, as if to assure himself he was still in control of the situation. "Not going to happen. You're already dead." "Yeah," I agreed. "This is true. Absolutely. Larry took a couple steps back, creating a little more distance between him and my strange, humorless grin. I found myself wondering about the nature and number of crimes this lumbering ogre had undoubtedly committed in the past. Where's the line between understandable and unforgivable? And how far past that line can someone tread before murder is the only solution? Larry jerked his head to the doorway. Get moving. Hang a left, keep going. Try anything, I'll pull this trigger. He marched me at gunpoint to the warehouse portion of the building, muttering a stream of tough guy blusterings as he trailed behind me. The warehouse had been converted into a new version of the old arena. The folding chairs had been replaced with theater seating and an incline, but everything else looked exactly the same, including the cage. There was a circular tier of private booths along the back of the arena, luxurious seating for wealthier patrons who might wish for a more discreet viewing experience. The cage itself was 20 feet long on all four sides, and it towered at least 10 feet in the air. The wall behind the cage was dominated by a giant screen with a crisp, high-definition picture. It was displaying the arena from different angles. The hidden cameras switched to a view of me walking down the aisle, zooming in for a close-up shot of my face. I looked haggard and exhausted. My eyes were dark and hostile, but there was a bewildering look on my face, as if I didn't know where I was anymore. This wasn't a lie. Reality had split in two as soon as I set foot in the arena. Half of me was in the present, a grown man whose footsteps were echoing across a vast and empty space, and the other half was a frightened and traumatized child. In the present, the room was empty, but in the past, the seats were full of strangers with rough voices and empty eyes. Some of them wanted to watch me die. Others wanted me to survive so I could fight for their amusement another day. All of them wanted me to suffer because our suffering was the main attraction. The money they lost or won from their wagering was secondary. They wanted us to bleed. They wanted us to cry and scream and sob for our mothers with our last gasping breath. Our suffering was like a drug for them. It made them feel alive. The director was waiting for me at the cage. His men were all sitting in the front row muttering amongst themselves as they waited for the action to start. We glowered at each other for a moment, and then he asked, "Are you sure about this? Bullet would be faster. Wouldn't feel a thing." I replied, "Yeah, I'm sure. Stop trying to get out of it." There was a stir of murmuring and whispering amongst the hired thugs in the front row. They had never seen anyone talk to their boss like this before. No one would ever dare. He growled, "I gave you a chance. You're going to regret that. You're going to regret your entire existence." "I already do," I sighed, and started pulling off my boots. "You know the rules. No shoes, no weapons." I piled my coat with my sweatshirt on top of my boots. Paul did the same. He'd grown a bit of a potbelly in his middle age, but there was still a heavy layer of muscle rippling beneath the extra padding. I pointed at the dragon tattoo on his chest and said, "I think it should have been a vulture instead." Paul's lips curled into a snarl, but he ignored me, swinging open the door of the cage. "After you, 17. I look forward to this." Calmly, I replied, "You know the rules, Paul. No weapons. Empty your pockets." "I don't have any pockets." "Who's stalling now?" I crossed my arms and waited, staring at him with a faint smile on my lips. Finally, he muttered a curse and pulled my knife from his back pocket. He tossed it onto his pile of clothes and grunted, "Must have forgot about that." I said, "Sure you did," and I entered the cage. The adrenaline overload was starting to thrum and pulse across my body in waves. My heart was pumping faster, my breathing more rapid. I looked out into the seats behind the director's men and was unsurprised to see they were now occupied by restless spirits. They had once cried out for mercy, but no one heard their screams. They had wept a collective ocean of tears, but no one gave them comfort. They were the dead, the silenced, the forgotten. Their light had been extinguished for the amusement of evil men. There were hundreds of them out there, and almost all of them were children. There was row upon row of gaunt faces and dark, mournful eyes. There were so many of them, they filled both of the aisles and were lined up 3 deep behind the last row. I saw Christy out there, standing beside her father. And then I spotted the child version of myself in one of the aisles, standing motionless and silent. We locked eyes, and he gave me a very slight nod of approval. It was time for justice to be served. Paul entered the cage with an arrogant swagger. There was a nasty smirk on his lips. One of his goons locked the door behind him, and we stared each other down from across the cage. I called out, "Do you see them out there in the stands, Paul? They've been waiting for you. They've been waiting a long, long time." Paul's smirk faded a bit. He shot a glance out at the seats, shifting his weight uneasy from one foot to the other. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. "Who's watching?" I replied, "The dead." And I started shuffling closer. "They're here to claim their revenge. Oh, by the way, winner takes all. If I walk out of here, this operation's mine. That sound fair?" A primal scream tore out of his throat, and he lunged at me. I slipped under a right cross and drove my shoulder into his stomach. Paul staggered back, but he quickly wrapped his arms around my torso and flipped me into the air. I instinctively rolled when I hit the floor, barely avoiding his trademark stomp to the head. He tried to jump on me, but I kicked him in the stomach with both feet. Paul stumbled back with a grunt of pain, windmilling his arms to keep his balance. He had a startled look on his face. No one had hit him back in a long, long time. I popped up to my feet and we started circling each other, both of us looking for an opening to attack. "You won't walk out of here. No one can beat me," I responded with a flying kick to his chest. He bounced off the wall of the cage and I took him to the floor. I tried to shove my thumb into his eyes, but he caught my wrist and sank his teeth into my forearm. He had my other arm trapped against his side, so I battered the back of his skull with my forehead until he let go. We rolled on the cold cement, both of us struggling to gouge an eye or bite off an ear. Paul's teeth scraped the bridge of my nose and I chomped down on his lower lip. He let out a shrill scream as I stretched it to the point of tearing it, and he clamped his fingers into my sides, twisting and pulling with savage ferocity. It hurt like hell. I let go of his mangled lip and he shoved me away with a forearm to the throat. We scrambled to our feet again, both of us panting and leaking blood on the floor. Our audience of cutthroats and gunmen had all left their seats to crowd around the cage. Some of them were yelling encouragement to their boss, and others were yelling for more bloodshed in general. Nothing mattered except their desire for violence. We clashed again, exchanging a quick barrage of punches and kicks. I kept the pressure on, striking hard and fast, and I steadily drove him backwards. My opponent was emanating an acrid stench of desperation. He got his nose broken with a jab, followed by a glancing shot across the jaw. He tried to shoot in for a takedown. I stepped aside and threw him across the cage. He hit the floor hard and rolled into the steel bars with a tremendous bang. As he pulled himself to his feet, one of his men handed him something through the bars. When he turned to face me, light shimmered from a reflective surface in his hand. He was holding my knife. I dodged a stab to the heart that would have been fatal, and then I was on the run. Paul stalked me from one end of the cage to the next, relentlessly attempting to herd me into a corner. His breath was snorting in and out like a bull. One of his eyes was swollen shut, and his face was a mask of blood. He looked like Christy's dad in the last minutes of his life, beaten to a pulp and chained to a pole by his neck. I panted. "It's not fun when you're on the other side of the stick, is it?" I skipped away from another jab, but this time my bare feet slipped on the blood-spattered concrete. I went down in one knee. The tip of the blade sliced across my cheek as I fell back, releasing a thick curtain of red blood. He dropped on me with all of his weight, the knife poised to stab through my chest. I squinted my eyes against the rain of hot blood and rancid sweat that was dripping off of his face, and I concentrated on controlling his knife hand. He wheezed. Here it comes. Here comes the darkness." I finally managed to twist to the side, forcing the knife point away from my chest, and at the same time I rammed the top of my head into the shelf of his chin. I heard a sharp pop as his jaw fractured and the knife came tumbling out of his hand. Paul slumped over with a fresh spattering of crimson drizzling from his mouth, and I threw him off. He fell hard onto his unprotected face, and the impact smashed his already broken nose into a shapeless mess. I hunkered on my knee and struggled to catch my breath, watching as he squirmed towards the door of the cage. He left a trail of smeared blood in his wake. Just as he reached the destination, I dragged him back to the center of the cage by his feet. He promptly curled up into a fetal position, his hands cupped over his face to protect his skull. "Get up," I commanded, and slapped his hands away. "Fight isn't over until one of us is dead. You're still breathing. Get up." Paul refused to look at me. He raised a trembling hand in a ward-off gesture, and he whispered, "You win. It's done." I told him, "That's not how this works." And he started crying. His men watched this undignified scene unfold with sullen displeasure. He tried to crawl for the exit a second time, and once again I dragged him back to the middle of the cage. I rolled him over with my foot and plopped down on his stomach, pinning his arms with my knees. I looked down at his bleeding, mangled face, and I said, "You messed me up, you son of a bitch. You messed me up really bad. I put my memories to sleep so I could hide from my own past, but now they're waking up and I can't hide anymore. I have work to do." It's probably quite painful for him to speak, but Paul managed to say, "You won't get away with this. You've made a horrible mistake, 17. I screamed into his face, "My name is David!" And I slapped him across his broken jaw. "I'm not a number, do you understand? I have a name, and that name is David. Say it!" David? And I nodded in agreement. "That's right. You're going to give me some names, Mr. Director. Everyone who is involved with running this operation of yours, I want their names." Paul tried to spit a wad of bloody mucus at me. It plopped onto his own chest directly over the head of his dragon tattoo. He gurgled. "No, go find them yourself." Fair enough. And I wrapped my hands around his neck. I could have used my knife and ended it much faster, but he didn't deserve a quick death. I wanted him to suffer. Paul squirmed and struggled as he kicked his legs and drummed his heels against the floor. His face began to turn a deep shade of red. It darkened into an ugly purple, and his tongue started to protrude from his mouth. At the end, he voided his bowels into his pants, and I released my grip on his throat. It was done. My boogeyman was no more. At that instant, I heard a high-pitched shriek from outside the cage. It was Paul. He was trying to run from the crowd of spirits, but they caught him in one of the aisles. Paul screamed in agony as they surged over him, and he was torn to pieces. As soon as his cries went silent, I heard a panicked shout echo from the far side of the room. It was Paul again, desperate for a way to escape. The crowd pursued him once more, and they ripped him limb from limb. But then he popped up yet again, his body made whole mere seconds after he was dismembered. This time he made it up the stairs to one of the exit doors. The spirits caught him out in the hallway, and the process repeated itself again, and again, and again. I looked around at Paul's former employees, and I saw that none of them could perceive what was happening to their dearest departed boss. No one could see or hear it but me. That was probably for the best. I rattled the door and said, "I'm the boss around here now. Let me out. I've got stuff to do." They all exchanged uneasy glances with each other. Larry cautiously shuffled over to the door, his pistol gripped tightly in both hands. "Yeah, we're not going to do that. Be serious here, would you? No one in their right mind would even consider..." Larry was interrupted by a large metallic ping. The deadbolt abruptly fell to the cement pieces. He scuttled out of reach as I swung the door open. There was a look of sheer terror in his eyes. He stammered, How did you do that?" I calmly replied, "I didn't do anything. It was the dead. They want me to finish where I started. I looked around at the rest of the former director's hired guns. Every single one of them avoided looking me in the eye. Like I just said, I'm the new boss around here and I'm shutting this down. You're all fired. Get the hell out of here. Be good, or I will come looking for you. Larry started to respond. I said, get the hell out of here! Larry flinched, dropping his pistol in the process. There was an immediate stampede up the aisles. 15 seconds later, I was standing by myself in an empty room, breathing heavily as blood dried in a tacky crust on my skin. I got dressed and I left the arena. I grabbed my knife and Larry's fallen pistol before I headed up the aisle to the exit doors. My first stop was a restroom, where I cleaned myself up the best I could, with hand soap and paper towels. Overall, I came walking out of the cage in decent condition. The bite on my forearm had barely torn the skin, but the cut on my cheek was very bad. If it had gone any deeper, my gums and teeth would have been exposed. It needed stitches as soon as possible, or it had become a problem. Next, I called 911 on the phone at the front desk. I told the operator there were 2 murder victims in the building, and they'd find a third outside. When she started asking for more details, I hung up the phone. I wasn't going to be around to cooperate with first responders. I had other plans. As I turned to leave, a bullet whizzed past my head and punched a hole through the wall. It was Rosemary. She had been hiding in a cubicle at the back of the office, waiting for me with a gun in her hand. Her second shot hit me in the shoulder, and then I blew a chunk out of her skull with Larry's pistol. My ears were ringing and my shoulder was burning. Blood was already soaking through my coat. I reeled out the front door and lurched under the parking lot. My head started swimming and my legs felt like they were going to buckle beneath my weight. I could hear sirens approaching in the distance. I gasped. Oh, fuck. And fell to my hands and knees. I started to crawl towards the open gate, panting and groaning like an injured animal. It wasn't fair. I didn't want to die yet. I had so much work to do, so many wrongs to right, and now it was finished before I had even gotten started. My shoulder gave out and I collapsed on my side. This is how it would end. Bleeding out in a parking lot beneath a gray winter sky. And evil would once again prevail. And they could easily find a new director for their ghastly murder games, and all my suffering would become meaningless. It wasn't fair. As my senses began to fade, I became dimly aware of a vehicle that was speeding down the street. It crashed into a partially open gate, flinging it violently against the fence, and it came to a screeching halt in front of me. I thought to myself, the cops got here just in time to watch me die. And then I realized it wasn't the police at all. It was a blue sedan. The back door popped open and a deep voice urged me to climb inside. I summoned just enough strength to crawl into the back seat, and then we were peeling away with a screech of smoking rubber. I tried to make out the other occupants, but my sight was too blurry from blood loss to make out their features. My eyelids weighed 50 pounds, and a patchwork of darkness was creeping around my vision. All I could do was hope for the best. And then I was out cold. When I opened my eyes, I was lying in a narrow cot with an IV tube in my arm. An older man with graying hair was sitting beside me in a plastic chair. When he saw that my eyes were open, he put his book down on a TV tray and patted me on the hand. He said, "Welcome back, David. Just take it easy and relax. You're safe here. Do you remember me?" I was too exhausted to speak out loud, so I shook my head and mouthed the word no. He patted my hand again. "I'm an old friend. Close your eyes, get some rest. We'll talk again soon." I had just enough time to register that I wasn't in a hospital, and then I was out again. I dreamed of nothing at all. It was pure bliss. And with that, I think I'm done talking for today. The story of what happens next will have to wait for another time. All I can tell you is that I have a purpose now. I'm at peace with who I am. My name is David, and officially I don't exist. I have no driver's license, no social security number, no credit score, no work history, none of that. I am a small blip at the edge of your reality. I have no ego to speak of, and I don't require all the lavish comforts of the material world. I could sleep in a tent and eat from a dumpster for months at a time. I don't need human contact. I actually prefer the company of the dead. I have much more in common with the spirits than I do with the living. I'm not a number anymore, but I'm not a regular person either. I'm a shadow, a rumor, and I hunt those who believe their status will shield them from justice. My name is David, and I'm nothing. I was asleep for many years, but the dream is over. I'm wide awake now, and I have work to do. Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and before we say goodnight, I just wanted to say thank you so much for watching tonight's video or for listening to tonight's episode of the podcast. As always, I want to give a very big thank you to everybody who supports me on Patreon, patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta. That is the main place you guys are able to support me if you guys want to be able to support me, which you absolutely don't have to do, but hey, thank you for, doing that if that's something that you do. And if it's not something that you do, hey, please help me. In all seriousness, I really appreciate it if you guys could be able to help me out. If you guys are able to give anything, even $1 a month. And especially if you guys like, you can become one of these wonderful people whose names I mispronounce. People such as Diana Kraus, AcidSystem, Benjamin 2003, Blake Rattler, Bottle Coolant, Brandon Mendoza, Caltuna, CoryxKenshin, Dakota Best, Daniel Poulsen, Dante Kinkade, Enchanted Buns, Eric Anthony Caruso, Estebean, 15 Squirrels in a Trench Coat, Galaxy Gremlin, Hayes Nephew, Himbo Jerry, Our Minute Second Time, Jay Kearns, Jed is Pet, Lou Cypher, Nick MC, Plant Piss, Red Shadow Cat, Remember the Sun, Salty Surprise, Samara Lynn, Scary Stories Fuel Me 32, Seclude, Simba's Bloody Mojo, Sky Harbor, Smiley the Psychotic, Sully Man, Polly Sue, Team Leo 76, The Chavez Brothers, The Ginger Bros, Tommy Walters, Viceroy Scorn, William Wellington, X Reaper 69, XX Lucky Cat XX, Zabold, Shadow Gardens, and Peaceful Buddha. All these really great guys, as well as all the folks you see in the description down below, or everybody that you see scrolling across the screen. Hey, I want to say thank you so much for supporting me. Thank you all so much for being here. And as always, sweet dreams.